Have you ever wondered why silence unsettles those who once thrived on your reactions? Why your absence feels louder than your presence ever did? It's not about disappearing. It's about reclaiming. In a world that feeds on your availability, on your need to please, to fix, to be chosen, withdrawing is an act of power so radical it cracks the illusion of control others thought they had over you. There is a sacred violence in becoming unreachable, not through cruelty, but through clarity. The moment you step back, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, you reveal the architecture of invisible chains. The constant messages, the subtle manipulations, the games played beneath smiles and apologies, all of it begins to fall apart when you no longer play along. And this is not punishment, it is revelation. Because people don't get addicted to you. They get addicted to the role you play in their ego's drama. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the hidden, repressed parts of the self that we deny but project onto others. When you are always available, always accommodating, you become a screen for their projections. You carry their unloved parts, their insecurities, their fear of abandonment. They feed off your predictability. But the moment you choose to retreat, the shadow rises, in them and in you. And that is where the real transformation begins. To withdraw is not to vanish, it is to confront. And confrontation, in the Jungian sense, is not with others. It is with your own unconscious. You begin to see why you made yourself so easy to reach. You begin to understand the quiet desperation that made you say yes when you wanted to say no. You unravel the threads of codependency, the trauma-bonded scripts passed down through bloodlines and bedtime stories. The little girl taught to serve, the boy taught to suppress, the adult taught to survive through performance. But here's the thing most never realize. When you stop being available, you don't just change how others treat you. You change what they see in themselves. Your silence becomes a mirror. Your retreat becomes their reckoning. They are no longer able to use you as a buffer against their inner emptiness. They can no longer manipulate a reaction out of you to reassure themselves they still have power. Suddenly they are faced with the truth. Control was always an illusion. And what about you? You begin to feel something rare, peace. At first it may feel like emptiness, like loss, because the ego is addicted to noise, addicted to being needed. But in the stillness, something ancient awakens. The true self, the self not born of approval or applause, the self that does not perform, does not beg, does not chase, the self that simply is, sovereign, still, complete. When you become less available, your value doesn't decrease, it expands. Because availability has never equaled love. Constant presence has never equaled loyalty. What they wanted was access to your energy, to your validation, to your wounds. But what you needed was alignment. And alignment only comes through withdrawal, through discernment, through choosing yourself, even when the world demands otherwise. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say, or think, or do, that is the essence of individuation, the process by which you become whole unto yourself, not fragmented by others' expectations, not diluted by your need to be understood, but whole, grounded, divine. This is not a rebellion of bitterness, it is the grace of boundaries, the art of absence, and yes, it will confuse them. It will anger them. It will shake the foundations of what they thought they knew. But that is not your burden to carry. You were not born to soothe the wounds of those who refuse to face themselves. You were born to heal by confronting your own, and in doing so, breaking the chain. Because when you stop being available, everything changes. And so, in the vacuum of your absence, they will try to call you back. Not always with words, but with the same old patterns. Passive-aggressive remarks, sudden affection, guilt cloaked as concern. They will test the locks on the doors you finally closed. Why? Because your availability was a drug, and now they're in withdrawal. Your silence dismantles their carefully curated sense of superiority. The echo of your detachment reverberates through the chambers of their hollow identity, exposing the fragility of the persona they wore like armor. This is what Carl Jung meant when he spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to meet the world. You, once the compliant one, the helper, the empath, had a persona shaped by survival. But when that mask begins to crack, when you start saying less, giving less, offering less of your soul on the altar of other people's comfort, it terrifies those who never truly saw you. They only saw the role you played for their benefit. You were never their peace. You were their distraction from their own chaos. But to pull away is to return to yourself. This is the alchemy of individuation, the sacred process of becoming who you were before the world told you who to be. And it is painful. There is mourning in this. You will grieve the version of yourself that tolerated too much, the one who answered every late-night text, who over-explained, who twisted herself into shapes just to make others feel secure. That version dies so the real one can rise. And rising, in this sense, is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is not a burning bridge. It is a quiet disassociation from dysfunction. A refusal to be emotionally available to chaos masquerading as intimacy. A decision to protect your nervous system the way you once protected people who weaponized your empathy. Psychologically, this withdrawal is not avoidance. It is regulation. It is safety. It is healing the wounded inner child who was conditioned to overextend just to feel worthy of love. It is speaking a new language, one the unconscious understands deeply. Self-respect. The human psyche is drawn to balance. When you were always available, you distorted the natural order. You overfunctioned, they underfunctioned. You gave too much, they gave too little. You explained yourself, they misinterpreted you on purpose. And in the end, what did you receive? Exhaustion, confusion, emotional debt. But when you withdraw, the system collapses. The teetering seesaw of imbalance breaks, and in its rubble you rebuild, differently. Seneca once said, "He who is everywhere is nowhere." The same is true of emotional presence. When you are always accessible, you are never valued. Your presence becomes assumed. Your time becomes disposable. But when you guard your availability, when you treat your energy as sacred, others are forced to treat it that way too, or they fall away, and let them. Because the ones who truly see you will never fear your boundaries. They will not be alarmed by your solitude. They will not interpret your silence as hostility. They will recognize it as sovereignty, and they will rise to meet you there. You are not here to be consumed. You are here to be known, but being known requires being real, and realness requires withdrawing from the roles you never consented to, but played anyway. The caretaker, the rescuer, the emotional sponge, the fixer, these are not badges of honor. They are chains, and to break them, you must retreat into the wilderness of self, where you remember what it feels like to breathe without being watched, to feel without performing, to exist without being needed. Because when you stop being available, you stop being predictable, you stop being controllable, and that is terrifying, not for you, but for those who depended on your self-abandonment to feel whole. This is the gateway, the crossing, the edge of transformation where you leave behind who you were trained to be and walk toward who you were meant to become. The moment you step fully into this silence, this chosen unavailability, you do not just step away from others, you step into your own unconscious. And there, in the vast subterranean caverns of the soul, waits the shadow. Not the darkness others projected onto you, not the judgments they whispered behind your back when your light no longer fed their egos. No, the real shadow, the parts of you that you disowned to be loved, the rage you suppressed to be accepted, the desire you buried to be seen as good, the wildness you caged because chaos made them uncomfortable. But now, in the sacred stillness of your withdrawal, that shadow rises, not to destroy you, but to integrate you. Because you cannot become whole by being half of yourself. You cannot find peace by silencing the parts of you that scream. And so, you turn inward. You face the mirror Jung warned us about. The one that doesn't flatter. The one that doesn't lie. The one that shows you, raw, unfiltered, unpolished. And you realize the person you were pretending to be was never real. She was an echo. He was a performance. What you are now is becoming. Individuation is not ascension, it is descent, into pain, into truth, into freedom. The more unavailable you become to the world's illusions, the more available you become to your own essence. And essence does not ask to be understood. It simply is. The ego wants applause. The soul wants alignment. And alignment often requires invisibility for a time. When you no longer rush to explain, justify, or beg to be chosen, you begin to feel something rare in this world. Dignity. Not pride, not arrogance, but dignity. The quiet knowing that your worth is not transactional, that your energy is not a currency to be spent on the emotionally bankrupt, that your love is not a product to be earned, but a force to be invited. Epictetus taught, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. And here's the secret. Your availability was always under their control. The moment they snapped, you answered. The moment they grew distant, you chased. The moment they criticized, you folded. But not anymore, because now you see, now you choose, now you don't react, you respond, or better yet, you don't respond at all. And they feel that. Oh, they feel it, because energy doesn't lie. They may never say it aloud, but the silence will haunt them. The old version of you would have checked in, apologized, explained. The new version says nothing, and that nothing echoes louder than any scream ever could. This is what real power looks like. Not dominance, not control, but detachment. The ability to walk away, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. The knowing that peace is not found in proving your worth to people who never saw it to begin with. Peace is found in walking away before they steal any more of your light. When you become unavailable, you stop being their emotional crutch. You stop being the place they go to avoid themselves, and that, more than anything, forces growth, or forces them out of your orbit. Both are victories. Both are grace. Because not everyone deserves access. Not everyone can hold the sacred weight of your presence. And that is not cruelty. That is discernment. That is healing. That is love, for yourself, finally. So when they ask what changed, you don't have to answer. Let the silence explain. Let your distance speak. Let the absence of your old patterns be the loudest revelation of all. Because when you stop being available, the universe rearranges. People fall away. Truths emerge. Shadows rise. And in the rubble of the role you once played, you stand alone. Not lonely, but liberated. There's a stillness that arrives when you no longer chase. A silence that doesn't beg to be filled. It sits inside your chest like an ancient truth rediscovered, not through words, but through the collapse of every identity you once held too tightly. You begin to see clearly. What you called connection was often entrapment. What you called chemistry was your trauma colliding with theirs. And what you called love was your availability being drained drop by those who feared the weight of their own emptiness. But now you're no longer available for that. Not emotionally, not spiritually, not energetically. You've tasted the freedom that comes when your peace is no longer negotiable. Jung taught that healing is not found in becoming better versions of who others want you to be. Healing is in becoming who you truly are beneath the layers of adaptation. And adaptation is a beautiful survival strategy, but it is not a life. You adapted to pain. You adjusted to betrayal. You normalized the absence of reciprocity and the presence of tension. And still you gave. You were available even in your depletion. But now you are learning the sacred discipline of restraint. You understand that not every message deserves a reply, not every question deserves an answer, and not every person deserves an explanation for your absence. Some things are better left unspoken, not out of malice, but because growth often speaks most loudly through distance. Withdrawal is not a lack of love, it is the highest form of self-respect. And the world, conditioned by immediacy and overstimulation, cannot always comprehend this kind of grace. They will accuse you of being cold, distant, changed. They will mourn the version of you who gave endlessly without boundaries. But that version is gone, and her death was the beginning of your resurrection. The archetype of the healer often walks this path. Wounded early, trained to feel the emotions of others as their own, they learn to fix, to mend, to carry. But eventually the healer breaks, not out of weakness, but because the soul refuses to be used as an endless well. And in that breaking, a fire is lit. A new archetype emerges, the sovereign. The sovereign is not emotionally reckless. They are emotionally discerning. They do not pour endlessly into others. They pour inward. They tend to their own wounds. They listen to their own silence. They choose solitude not as punishment but as medicine. And in that quiet they remember love is not sacrifice. Love is not burnout. Love is not abandoning yourself so someone else can stay whole. You see, when you were always available, you were interrupting their karma. You were delaying their reckoning. You were shielding them from the natural consequences of their actions. But when you step back, the universe steps in. And that's when the real work begins, for them and for you. Because you're no longer addicted to being chosen. You've seen the cost of that addiction. The self-abandonment, the hypervigilance, the sleepless nights wondering what you did wrong when all you ever did was give too much to someone who was never ready to receive it. That chapter is closed, and the next one begins with a locked door and a heart guarded not by fear, but by wisdom. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Just that you do the right thing. The rest doesn't matter." And sometimes the right thing is to walk away, to stop calling, to stop explaining, to stop hoping that one day they'll see what they were blind to when you were right in front of them. Because the truth is, they saw you. They just never expected you to leave. They thought you'd always be available, that you'd always come back, but you didn't. And that silence, that stillness, that distance, it's the sound of you healing. Now you walk with different footsteps, not louder, not faster, but heavier, not with burden, but with the gravity of someone who has returned to herself, to himself. And that return is not a dramatic proclamation. It is subtle. It is sacred. It is noticed not in what you say, but in what you no longer tolerate, in what you no longer respond to, in what you let fall to the ground without picking it up. The truth is, your unavailability doesn't just disturb others, it liberates you. It frees you from the invisible strings of people-pleasing, from the tight scripts of relational martyrdom. It pulls you out of the endless theater, where you performed stability for people who couldn't even name their chaos. Now you stand at the edge of your own soul, watching the roles burn one by one, the savior, the supporter, the forgiver, the one who always understands. Let them burn. Because what rises from those ashes is not someone colder, it's someone clearer. And clarity, in a world addicted to confusion, is dangerous. People will flinch when you speak directly. They'll recoil when you say no without justification. They'll brand your boundaries as walls, your peace as pride, your silence as punishment. But you know better now. You've studied yourself in the dark. You've witnessed your own longing and held it like a wounded animal until it stopped trembling. You've looked at the ghosts of your former self and whispered, "Thank you, but we don't live there anymore." Jung taught that most of our suffering is not caused by the external world, but by our refusal to confront what lies within. And when you were always available, you were avoiding yourself. It looked like kindness, compassion, love, but it was avoidance. It was fear. Because to be alone with your own unmet needs, your own unfulfilled longing, your own unexpressed rage, that was too terrifying. So you poured it all outward until you were dry, until you were gone. But now the pendulum has swung. You are learning to hold what arises, to sit with your discomfort instead of numbing it with caretaking, to observe your triggers instead of unleashing them on others. This is emotional alchemy. This is how the healer becomes the sovereign. You are no longer available for chaos disguised as connection. You are no longer available for conversations that circle the drain of dysfunction. You are no longer available for relationships where love is confused with control and empathy is weaponized against your own instincts. You are no longer available for convincing someone to see your worth, because your worth is not up for debate. It never was. Now you spend more time in quiet places, not just physically but emotionally. You speak less, but say more. You feel more, but express less to those who haven't earned access. You no longer broadcast your boundaries, you embody them, and embodiment is unshakable. You don't need to prove anything. The proof is in your presence. The evidence is in your peace. This peace, it is not loud, it is not showy, it is not performative. It is the kind of peace that unsettles those who once fed off your instability. It is the kind of peace that ends cycles, that closes loops, that speaks with silence and walks away without turning back. And if they come back, and some will, they won't recognize you. They'll try the same keys on doors you've replaced. They'll speak the same language, but you no longer respond in kind. They'll reach for the version of you who overfunctioned and find instead someone who simply observes. This is not revenge. This is not punishment. This is reclamation. Your energy, your time, your love, they are now guarded like sacred fire. Not because you're bitter, but because you finally understand what they're worth. And when you understand the value of your own essence, you stop offering it to those who trade in confusion. You've made yourself unavailable not out of arrogance but out of necessity, because to heal is to retreat, to grow is to withdraw, and to love yourself is to protect your light, even if that means shining alone. And now, the world begins to look different, not because the world has changed, but because you have. The lens you once looked through, the one shaped by scarcity, by survival, by the aching desire to be enough, has shattered. What remains is clarity. A calm, unsettling clarity that allows you to see what you couldn't before. You begin to notice how much noise you once tolerated, how many half-hearted apologies you accepted, how often you confused intensity for intimacy. Your withdrawal, your detachment has become your filter. The chaos no longer gets in. The guilt no longer seeps under your skin. The bait no longer catches you. And this, more than anything, threatens the old order. Because you were once so easily reached, so easily moved, so easily manipulated. And now they must meet themselves in the mirror you no longer hold for them. This is the quiet revolution of the self. It's not dramatic, it's not announced, it's not even always visible to the world. But within you, tectonic plates are shifting. What used to draw you in now repels you. What once felt like love now feels like harm. And the spaces you once filled with anxious effort, you now fill with breath, with space, with presence. The part of you that needed constant reassurance, she's been heard. The part of you that felt invisible unless you were useful, he's been seen. And the part of you that screamed in silence while smiling outwardly, she no longer has to hide. You have made room inside yourself for you, and that space cannot be shared with chaos anymore. Because what you're learning is this: love that demands your self-abandonment is not love. Attention that arrives only when you withdraw is not interest, it's panic. People chasing you when you go silent is not proof of their affection, it is evidence of their dependence. You were their mirror, their muse, their emotional mule, but no more. Now they must carry their own weight, face their own silence, sit with their own discomfort. You have become unavailable to being anyone's scapegoat for unhealed pain. Carl Jung believed the journey of the soul is toward wholeness, not perfection. And wholeness means welcoming every part of yourself back home, especially the ones you exiled to make room for someone else's comfort. That anger you were taught to suppress, it was trying to protect you. That sadness you swallowed to keep others at ease, it was your signal to slow down. That intuition you ignored to keep the peace, it was your compass all along. Now you're listening, and the more you listen, the more you realize how rare this kind of peace is. Not the peace that comes from getting what you want, but the peace that comes from no longer needing it. You don't need to be liked. You don't need to be understood. You don't even need to be forgiven by those who misunderstood your silence. Because your soul is not up for negotiation. Your spirit is not a commodity, and your heart is no longer for rent. The emotional availability you used to offer was not love. It was a survival mechanism. But survival is not living, and living requires limits. It requires honesty. It requires discomfort. The kind of discomfort that teaches you to sit with your own emotions rather than hand them to someone else. The kind of discomfort that breaks illusions, exposes shadows, and births boundaries. And from those boundaries, a new self emerges, one who does not perform, one who does not explain, one who does not apologize for the distance required to heal. Now, your unavailability is not a wall. It is a gate, a sacred threshold only those who carry self-awareness, respect, and reverence may pass through. And many won't. Many will fall away. Not because they were bad, but because your old self was the only version they could stay connected to. And when she died, their connection did too. Grieve that if you must, but don't chase it. Because the one who rises in her place, she doesn't beg to be chosen. She doesn't lower her standards to keep others close. She doesn't offer her soul to people who can't even hold a conversation about their own. She is rare, she is sacred, and finally, she is home. This is where the cycle ends, not in grand declarations or fiery closure, but in your quiet decision to stop offering yourself on altars that never blessed you. This is where you place your hands on the pulse of your own spirit and realize you've been trying to resuscitate connections that were only alive in your imagination. The moment you stopped being available was not a loss. It was a remembering. A remembering of how whole you were before the world told you to be half of yourself to be loved. You begin to see how many roles you were cast in without consent, how often you were the strong one, the understanding one, the one who never walks away. But strength is not endurance of pain. It is the refusal to let pain define your path. You were not born to be a vessel for other people's projections. You were born to be the embodiment of your own light, your own truth, your own soul's architecture. Now the silence you hold is sacred. It does not chase. It does not prove. It does not perform. It simply is. And those who can't meet you in that silence are simply not meant to walk with you. There is no bitterness in this, no revenge. Only the cool clarity of someone who has seen themselves clearly and decided to never again go unseen. You are no longer afraid of being misunderstood, because understanding is not your job, it is theirs. You are no longer willing to trade authenticity for attachment. You are no longer available for the roles that drained your joy, silenced your intuition, and required the death of your deeper self. This is your return, not to others, but to your origin, to the place where your soul first whispered, You are enough without being needed. Carl Jung taught that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And now you are doing just that. Not because it's easy, but because living any other way is a betrayal your soul can no longer tolerate. You do not need to make yourself smaller so others can feel big. You do not need to make yourself quiet so others can feel wise. You do not need to be less intense, less passionate, less whole to make others stay. If your depth frightens them, let them drown in shallow waters. If your silence unnerves them, let them fill the void with their own echoes. If your absence makes them spiral, it was never love, it was control. And now you are free of that. You've made peace with being the one who walks away first. Not because you didn't care, but because you finally cared enough about yourself. And that care is not conditional. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. It is simply unwavering. This is your rebirth. Not into someone new, but into someone ancient. Someone who remembers the language of her soul. Someone who no longer explains the wisdom of his silence. Someone who walks with grace not because she's unscarred, but because she's unshaken. You have become unavailable to manipulation, to guilt, to emotional games. You have become unavailable to inconsistency, to crumbs of affection, to love with strings attached. You have become unavailable to the life you once settled for. And in doing so, you have opened the door to everything real, everything honest, everything whole. Now your worth is no longer up for debate. Your energy is no longer on clearance. Your presence is no longer a given. You are the prize. You are the peace. You are the mirror they cannot distort. And if they cannot meet you in this new stillness, let them leave. You are no longer available for anything less than the truth.